In this video, you are going to learn how to use your pawns properly in the various stages of a chess game. Now, I've broken the video into a few parts. We're going to look at some examples from my own games, and then at the end, I'm going to play against 3 Twitch subscribers and take you through the thought process and pinpoint exactly how we should be using our pawns during the game. So, the way I want you to think about pawns in a chess game is they determine the structure of a position. They are like the fence. Now, what that means is some stand rock solid, some are weak. Sometimes there is a pawn break. A pawn break in a chess game is a spot where a trade can occur that changes the position, and then we will talk about other concepts as the video goes on. Now, pawn structure is determined early. Let's say white plays d4 and black plays d5. Now white plays bishop f4, the London system, and black plays e6. Already, this is how I want you thinking about pawns. What color complex do they occupy? And pawns control a square diagonally. They don't control a square in front of them because they can't capture it. So you already see that black is taking up a light square control, and white has a dark square control here with certain spots in the center of the board. White will then play knight to f3 and try to jump the knight in here. Now, there are certain spots in the position like c5. This is known as a pawn break or a pawn trade. If white were to take this, white would lose a central pawn and allow the black bishop to come out more actively. That is why early on, trading in the center doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. You only trade if you get a benefit to your position. Most times you restructure the center because if this trade happens, your center hasn't been affected too much. What changes, and the way I want you to think about this is, every time a pawn moves, it's not necessarily about the pawn itself. It's about the rest of the board. What other pieces are visualizing what? This happens in so many different openings. Let's say white plays e4, black plays the Sicilian defense. Just on the first move, black is fighting for the center with a flank pawn. And if we go just a few moves in, something like this, this is the open Sicilian with knight to c6. Let's say black plays the move e6, looking for the Taimanov variation. You'll notice the pawns are prickly and control all of the light squares in the territory. If the pawns are all on light squares, that means that the dark squared bishop is valuable. The bishop can zigzag through the open territory, and the light squared bishop is a little bit more stuck. So that is how pawns affect bishops. If you have a dark squared bishop, you want to find that nice balance. You don't want all your pawns on the same color square as the bishop, right? If you only have one of them, because your bishop's mobility is going to be significantly decreased. So whatever opening you play will determine the structure of the position. The more pawns there are on the board, the more closed the position is. The less pawns, the more open it is. The hardest part about a chess game is figuring out what breaks are good and what breaks are not. And one more thing I should just add. Let's not forget, pawns can be used as attacking mechanisms. Pawns go first into an attack. If you're castled your king on opposite sides, you'll see that the pawns go, okay? So, why don't we take a look at a few games played in my recently concluded I'm Not a GM speed match. This one was against GM Canty, and the first game is a King's Indian defense by black. And I played this variation with the 2 bishops. Black plays e5, and I play d5. Both of us very familiar. I closed the center. With a closed center, we are looking at the following pawn breaks. Pawn to c6. Black will play, f5 in the future. Now, I myself am not looking for this pawn break because that will open up the e file for my opponent and pressure my pawn, and it will open this bishop. You see how it affects the other pieces. In the King's Indian, I don't look for f4. I look to shut down my opponent's center because to start an attack, I need the center closed. Again, you cut the center, shut it, so that you can start an attack on your opponent. Watch, I play g4 to lock it down because I'm going to castle my king this way, and this is called a pawn storm when you storm your opponent's king. You'll notice my opponent played c6 in the game, as I said, and a short while later we had this position. Now, I'm up a pawn, I have 8 pawns versus 7. If you look at this position and you say, is this a good trade for black? Take, and then I will take back. No, it's not a good trade for black. If black plays the move c takes d5 in this position, I'm going to play knight takes. Who have you helped with this trade? Me. I got a knight in the middle now, and it's very well protected. It looks nice and dandy. And okay, you can give me a check, but actually, believe it or not, I can actually just move my king over 1 square, and my king is kind of safe. I know it looks crazy, but it's the reality. So instead of this, where are the pawn breaks? Practice that. B5, hitting this, trying to shred it all open, and F5. And F5 is the move my opponent played. You say, Levy, I'm not supposed to push the pawns. I put my king here. I shouldn't push my pawns in front of my king. It's okay, because you have to think, who can even get to my king? Nobody. My queen's certainly not going to do it. And when my pawn comes in, this pawn will just cover it all up. So I played F3, solidifying my center, structuring my pawns together. Black did this, and I castled the other way, which shows you why I'm able to push all these pawns. Queen B4, I have to sacrifice this pawn, because if I defend it, my pawn used to guard my knight. So important. You push a pawn, it used to guard somebody. So don't do that. I have to give it away. And then I went here, and my opponent took on D5. Now, this game got very crazy. This is one of the most insane structures you will ever see. Black literally just has 4 central pawns. But you know what's really good for me? This pawn. My opponent's pawn is really good for me. Why? It blocks the vision of the bishop. Again, I want you to get thinking about this. Pawns and other pieces interact. That is the most important thing. They interact, and it looks like they might not sometimes, but watch. In this position, I play the move G6. I'm offering my opponent a poisoned apple because now I have a target. You'll notice my pawn, I wish this pawn wasn't here because it's like this. It's blocking the attack that I want on my opponent's king. So I sacked the pawn. The best thing for my opponent to do, by the way, would have been not to take it, to glue the position shut like this with the bishop so I have no entrance. And when my opponent took, it immediately allowed me to jump over the fence. That's the beautiful thing about a knight. It doesn't care about the 4 pawns. It jumps in, and this is what we call an overextended pawn structure. You've brought everyone forward, but the back row has no guards, and I was able to jump in, win the pawn on G6, and in this position my opponent lost on time, but even if he had played a move like queen to E2, look at this, I've got every piece playing. Even though I'm down a full piece of material, because I broke through the defenses and got past all the pawns, I just have open lines. I open the position in an advantageous way with my rooks, my knight, and my queen. And my opponent wasn't accurate in taking my pawn, allowing me the open line to his king. Now for this next game, this was a French defense. I took on E4, and we got a position that was very interesting. This is called the burn variation, and you'll already notice that I have what's called doubled pawns. This is called an isolated pawn. It could be a weakness. It's a pawn that has no neighbors. And you'll note that I'm not going to put my king here for castling because my king will be open. So what do I do in the game? Well, I develop, look at this. This is a nice little structure for blocking out the queen, stopping my opponent from pushing c4, and my bishop gets a nice diagonal. Now, I played another move in this position, which is instructive. Bishop d5. Why would I do that? Well, first of all, I'm targeting a pawn that has no protector. And second of all, this pawn cannot break through. I see a rook, I see a pawn, I'm looking. How can my opponent attack me in the center? They want to open the center because my royalty is still there. I haven't castled, so I prevent that with the move bishop d5, glue it all shut, and bring my queen out. My pawns have opened the gate for my queen, and watch in this position as pawn play totally explodes, okay? My opponent plays f4, intending to play f5, so I open, and this is here. Another poisoned apple, so I play f5 myself. And then my opponent plays g4, sacrificing a pawn, and I mean, if I didn't take, he would have taken me, so I took for free, and then this. And then in this position, I noticed something really interesting. I don't have to take. I mean, taking is a little bit dangerous because rook is coming, but I have e5. And they can't take me because of the pin, the interaction of the other pieces. They cannot take me here because of this. And immediately, what did I do? I shut the door. I shut the door on the other pieces. Now, this pawn is weak, but nobody can attack it. This knight certainly can't. Queen f4 and h5, and the light squared pawns. Look at this. I have a dark squared bishop, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I couldn't count that so fast, so I had to count it out loud to pretend like I was teaching. 7 light squared pawns with a dark squared bishop. So my position counteracts the light squared bishop for the opponent, and the dark squared bishop for me is standing nice and pretty. And then what I ended up doing a little bit later is I didn't take back. I played h4. And then this was instructive. My opponent plays b3. Why? Wants to play c4. Why? Only thing defending the center. So what do? I play b4. And you say, Levy, how does that stop c4? Pawn goes 2 squares and it's right next to you. En passant. You can take diagonally for just 1 move. Beginners watching who just got confused, I'm really sorry. I promise that's the rule. And the rest of the game, I clamp down. You'll notice that as the game progresses, look what I do to my opponent's position. My opponent cannot move a single pawn here. Not a single pawn because I'll en passant both ways. Later in the game, the only way he was able to make progress was by trying to break, and I kept the clamp, and the game kept going and going, right? I negated the movement of the pawns. I dominate with the space advantage with the pawns controlling squares on the opponent's side of the board, and we were able to win. But even he got counterplay by finding the break in the structure and then immediately going this way. And he was actually able to save this game. Black is completely winning, but the game ended in a draw because he found the one break in the position to activate his rook on something called the open file, come in and start hunting me down. And it was a, low time situation. I ended up making a mistake, but he found the break. And that is how I want you to think about this. Now, for this last one, this game was just utter chaos. This was a Trumpowski, and the opening is not the most important thing, but you'll notice that here, it's a very imbalanced structure, and my pawns kind of glue together, right? They glue together. I'm missing a B pawn, but it's not super felt. This was a gambit that I played, and as the game goes on, I don't castle, and I'm pushing on both sides. It's like a very weird position. I'm taking squares away from his knight. This pawn is taking space as well. But I never ended up castling in this game, and it allows my opponent to throw all the pawns in front of his own king forward. G5. And you would say, Levy, this is bad for my own king. It's rare we see a king on the same side, more or less, attacking the other king. That's because his king's got reinforcements. The only piece past the second rank for me is my knight. And then ultimately it had to, come back because it was under attack. I was under pressure this entire game. And that is why my opponent was able to do this, to push on the same side as me. It's a rare case in chess, but if you have a piece majority, which in this case my opponent has of knight, bishop, rook, and queen, what do I have? I got a stupid king here that's like barely doing anything. That's why my opponent was able to push on the same side. So before we actually get into the games, this is how you have to think about it. The opening you play determines your structure, okay? I have videos on pawn structure. You want to learn more about pawn structure, there's a great article. I put it in the link in the description. Now let's play some chess, okay? I am going to play a few subscribers who volunteered to be in the video. They are 5-minute games. I'm playing against Dap, who's rated 900, then a 1200, and then Kind of Ping Jake, who's a 1500. I'm going to play D4. It's going to be a London. Because I'm just going to play a London for this game, because I showed it in the introduction, and we're just going to focus on the structure. So, when the bishop goes to f5, the queen side is destabilized for black. And a useful thing to do here with white is to play the move c4, which I actually talked about earlier, which allows you to bring the queen out. My opponent is copying what I'm doing, which is totally fine. And now I'll play c4. There's a little trick here, actually, for my opponent. Bishop b4 check is not a great move. Because knight c3, but he can play bishop b1 and then bishop b4. I'm more trying to focus on the pawns than the tactics. So this knight is now blocking this pawn. We know that c5 there is good. I've got what's called a central majority. I have 2 versus 1. It would be nice if I could push this in the future, but that destabilizes this from the knight and the queen. So I'd need to play knight f3 and then e4. How can my opponent control this? Probably with just the knight to f6. Right? Okay, bishop d6. If I take, generally the best thing to do in a London when you get this trade offered to you is to just slide the bishop back to g3. If my opponent were to take, I would take like this and open up my h file. But for now, we're going to finish our development and keep going. Okay? So there we go. Queen to d7. That hasn't changed the structure too much. Basically, this is the only pawn break for black, but right now I'm controlling it. I do want to land the move e4 in the future, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to play queen e2. The bishop has blocked the queen from the control of the file, and now the move e4 is coming. So a central expansion here to take space. If I play e4, maybe the bishop is actually going to pin me, and I don't like the destabilization, but I will castle queenside. The rook will protect the pawn, and that is how we are kind of visualizing this. Also, it would be nice if the pawn went there to open the rook to the queen, and we can accomplish that with a trade, showing you how the pawns interact with some of the other pieces. The other pawns are kind of staying at home. This is a much more piece-centric game right now. If more trades were to happen, you know, maybe we would see... Okay, so this is coming here. That will change the structure a little bit. Nothing crazy. Just to show you the instructional value here, I will go here. It's not the best move. The bishop will take the knight, and I will take back. And that changes the structure like this. This is now weak. You know, it can be targeted. But I have a central advantage here, which is still nice. My opponent hits my bishop. It is protected. So maybe, I mean, maybe I don't have to move it. Maybe I go, well, if I go back to d3, maybe the knight jumps in. So instead I'm going to play knight to e5, which attacks the queen. It blocks my bishop, and I believe the queen can come here and attack my pawn on b2, but then I will just slide my queen over, and there's not really going to be a problem. But you see that's happening. Queen to e7 attacks my pawn. As I said, that is how you have to see the effect of trades of pawns, but with queen b2, I defend everything. Now, I didn't have to do this, but again, I just want to show you how to visualize pawn weaknesses. Okay? So that is an extremely important skill, even at 900 or 1200. It's going to be the next player that I play. So that is how I want you to visualize the changes in the positions. Knight takes c4. Knight takes c4. Now, what else is going on here? I've got a nice center. I can build it up slowly. And the other thing here with the bishop and the queen is we're castled on the same side, so it's not going to be so easy here to actually break in. I mean, I have a queen visualizing. I can add a knight, but generally one-move threats like this are not really going to get it done. Is this attacking anything? Not really. If I push this, this loses a guard, but this is still defended. So I can just play f3 and try to go e4. This is much more of a building process with your pawns. Frankly speaking, it's really hard for me to make any progress in this position unless it's going to be with my pawns. Think about it, like, all I have here is a one-move checkmate threat, which can be stopped, not with b6, not with b6, because then I would have jumped in here, but something like bringing the knight back to get in the way of my queen, or even c6 maybe, to protect. But knight a5, these one-move threats, they don't always get the job done. We're going to continue here with e4. So sometimes you just got to take space. Then you say, well, Levy, what about this? What about h4, h5? Now, you're right. I know you thought that. But h4 is just met with h5. Like, it would be great if I could play h4, h5. Right, so that would have been, you know, that would have been easily stopped. Now, knight b6 is a trade opportunity. I guess I will take. Now my opponent has what's called doubled pawns, and maybe I can chip away at them, but maybe should I trade queens and make this like, oh, let's do it. I'm going to show you something funny. So in this position, after queen takes b4, after queen takes b4, there is going to be a change in the position which is going to decide the outcome of the game. If I take with the A pawn, it opens the A file. If I take with the C pawn, there is the C file open. Very big decision. This splits my pawns, whereas this kind of brings my isolated pawn being together. I'm going to take with the C pawn. It's a massive pawn structure game. Right, so king there, interesting. Maybe a pawn break to open up my rook? Maybe. Maybe bringing the king over to protect my weak a3 pawn so that my rook can go target this with the bishop, or a pawn break here. f6 is a strange move. So rook c1 goes here to target this. It's like the strongest 900 of all time, by the way. Bringing the rook like this to try to create this break, but then my opponent has e5, which shuts out my bishop. Right? Something like that. Okay, that weakens this a little bit. I'm thinking maybe bishop f2 and pawn to d5 is an option. It's a big decision here to trade the rooks. I'm gonna do it. I'm not fully convinced that this is like any sort of anything, but maybe here. Let's take. And we could have maybe traded rooks. Whoa, what is that? That just allows me to get a connected, protected pass pawn with a check. Oh my, that was a mistake. That must be a mistake, right? There's no way that can be good. And now I use my pawn as defense and I play rook c7 check. And after rook takes, pawn takes, it's an attack like this. The pawn has traveled like the whole board, it feels like. I mean, it's, I don't know which way it exactly came from, but rook c7, and now we do this. Rook d8 doesn't win because the rook is protecting, and I don't want the pawn to shut me out here. So I think I'm going to play bishop d6. So I have a permanent lock there. Ooh, this is an instructive game. Very good game. I'm telling you, I don't know who the heck this 900 is, but not playing like a 900 right now. Playing the game of his life here. It's not too hard of a position to play with black, I have to say, but I mean, some of you watching will be like, bro, I'm 1300. I would have hung all my pieces by now. It's usually how it works, right? Okay, bishop f5. Now, again, I can use my pawns here to build and force the bishop back. No other safe move. Creating a weakness. And it is the endgame, so, I mean, in the endgame, what's important? I mean, king activity, piece activity, I'm as active as I can be, it feels like. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go here and here. I'm going to put my opponent in an inescapable boot. I'm going to play bishop e7 and bishop d8. The bishop and the pawn will protect each other, and the king will not be able to escape, and the rook is going to have a tough time defending here, and opponent just decides to sacrifice, leaving us in an endgame. Now, good thing we're still doing this, because even in the endgame, pawns are extremely important. In rook versus bishop endgames, you need to have as many pawns on the board as possible, okay? Because if you get rook and bishop versus versus bishop, I should say, if rook versus bishop, that's just a draw. And in the endgame, you've got to try to find the spots to pick up the pawns. Now that my opponent is in a time trouble, he is finding himself on the receiving end of a lot of the pawns collapsing. And what happens when you get a big advantage like this? First of all, you pick up as many pawns as you can, but if you can sacrifice... Wow, this has been like Pac-Man. I literally took every pawn. It's kind of iconic, actually, that in a video about pawns, 5 pawns remain versus a king, and I simplified that down, and now pawns on both sides. You use one as a decoy, you let the king go, you make a queen, you can cut the king off like this, push, 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 make a second queen, just don't stalemate, and do your ladder mate. 2 queens and a checkmate. That is GG. That was a great game. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was helpful. For this next one and this last one, I'm going to play JD Mintz, who's rated 1200. The other volunteer. JD Mintz is actually not online, so I'm going to play Kind of Ping Jake. I hope. Let's try this. Here we go. I've got the black pieces for this one. I mean, I tell folks to be in live chess, but sometimes they're not. And I... All right. I'm waiting for Jake. Jake has made a move. I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting, YouTube. I'm gonna play the French defense and see what happens. Sometimes you can play the Caro-Kann, but in this game I'm gonna play the French. Say all good. Okie dokie. So, classical French, there's a few things that black can do here. I'm gonna play knight f6. This is known as the classical French defense variation. If white plays e5, which is considered one of the main lines, black rotates the knight back, and there is already a wedge here of pawns. Now, the main thing about these kinds of positions is you're looking at breaks like c5. So in the French defense, you're looking at c5 and f6 as the 2 main breaks, and you're looking to expand on the queen side while your opponent looks to take your head off on the king side with moves like g4, f5, and so on. Now, bishop b5 is not the best move because you've already put 3 pawns on dark squares. if you're going to trade your light squared bishop, you need pawns on light squares, if that makes sense. Your bishop on dark is already blocked in by the other pawns. Now, when this bishop goes here, I see a weak pawn. I'm going to slide my rook over to b8 to immediately put pressure on it, which would not have been possible a few moves ago because my pawns were here. And I'm not too worried about my doubled pawns. I can always take if I want to. I'm not worried about this either because the bishop is here. Now, which one of my bishops is terrible? It's this one. So I'm thinking a5 and bishop a6. And I'm thinking that because, oh my goodness, my bishop will be the absolute king of the light squares there. And I actually anticipate my opponent to play the... Okay, well, my opponent didn't play queen e2. So now bishop a6, and it is going to be a nightmare for my opponent to castle on this diagonal. Notice I'm allowing my pawns to move up a square to create opportunities for my other pieces. Now, okay, queen d2 is a move, of course. Now we gotta look. Do we take? Does that activate the knight? Is there a good reason to take? Maybe we just finish our development. See, I'm not taking. This is called keeping the tension. I'm keeping the tension here. It's not good to keep the tension in the headache or with your loved ones or your friends, but in this case, it's not so bad. Now, again, I'm looking at can we take. I just don't like that this comes here with pressure, but maybe I can defend first and then do that. Maybe that's what we do. Maybe a slight little improving move, queen c7. By the way, notice when the knight went back, the queen now sees this. It's defended, but it does see it. All right, I like castles. We both castle. I still have an absolute god of a bishop, and now we implement this game plan where we take. Opponent should have restructured with the pawn. I think the opponent should have played c3 to take back with the pawn, because had they done that, that would have opened the c file. But now I am improving my queen side here with my pawns. The knight has been booted from the center, and I will shove the d pawn here. Oh, phrasing. I will shove the d pawn onto d4, attacking the bishop and forcing the bishop to retreat. The main move there that would have been good for white was the move c3, but in a lot of these positions, there is a... Is that not just a free pawn? Take. I guess my opponent is... Wait, I can also play this first before I take the pawn. Do we like that? Let's just go here and see what the opponent wants. So we're up a pawn. We've got a nice, big, happy family. Maybe we bring the rook to target the weak pawn on the b file. I think the game is going to be won and lost in this area of the board on the right side. Opponent could play f5, but don't forget that I have some pieces targeting the center pawn, and f5 would destabilize that. Now, if I took this, that would stop guarding my other center pawn. So notice there's a... Oh, okay. Do I go here? Looks very natural. Also, maybe... Do I break? Oh. By the way, do I go f5 and just shut the whole thing down? Then en passant, and I take back? But that improves my position, no? How about f5? And if my opponent doesn't take, I got this beautiful structure. Nice and cozy structure, taking a lot of space away from his pieces. Big decision for white. Do you take? And get rid of this big central block and open the position for us both. Tough position. I'll move my knight, which right now my knight is very passive, but I'll move it to f6. I actually think that taking from my opponent isn't a bad move at all. Opponent decides not to take. Now it's quite a game. I mean, I have rook b8, which was my original idea. I like it. And I mean, again, you do need to look at, like, can there be a sacrifice? Sometimes, you know, your pawn on e6 here is defending everybody, and there could be a sacrifice. But at the moment, I don't see one. This. Now, I can push. That's actually the amazing thing here about this pawn break with the flank pawn, is it becomes handy when there's a pin. You got a pawn pin to a rook that you are over attacking. You can make this flank pawn push with the a pawn, and now they can't do anything. They actually have to protect this, otherwise you snatch it. So, although you want to know something epic, I'm not threatening to take. You know why? At the end of the whole sequence, remember that thing I told you about with knight takes f5? In fact, is he setting a trap? Is he setting a trap? Look at this. Take. If I take, there is this, and my pawn. Oh my goodness. I'm going to ask him, did you want rook takes b3, knight takes f5? I'm asking him. I know you're not supposed to write messages in the middle of the game, but that would be so epic if he saw that from a distance. Anyway, now the rook is pinning my pawn to my queen. I said amazing. I shouted you out in the video. Amazing trap. So the pawn is pinned, and I'm not guarding this, because if I take it, I would lose my queen. So the threat is this, which means I need to slide out of the way, and then rook takes b3 is now a renewed threat. And the reason I push my pawn, for, like, you think, well, Levy, what does this even accomplish? The pawn is no longer a target. Now you say, by the way, one way I could have done this, I could have also defended the other weakness. And you'll notice that a couple of turns ago, in a position where it looks like there is nothing, I said knight f5 and queen d5 is something you need to pay attention to. Get thinking this way. Okay, rook takes b3, rook b3. Now I just straight up think this is good. I don't see anything here. I don't see anything here. So I'm gonna do it, and if I'm blundering, I'm blundering, but I think I'm good. I'm 2 pawns up now. I've got connected, protected passed pawns. Passed pawns are pawns that have a path to the end, not in the, and there's no pawns stopping them from the side or in front. Even if there's pieces, it doesn't matter. The pawns are considered passed. And especially if they're both very well protected, we use pawns this game as a shielding mechanism to take away our opponent's comfort and space. And now we can even go in from the other side. I can't push this pawn because this pawn loses a guard, but I think I can push d3. See, the rook is coming in on the open file, though. It's not so easy. I mean, maybe I just come back, you know? Maybe I just bring this back so the rook can't get here. See? Don't always have to rush to take your opponent's head off. You have an opportunity to take a pause. I actually think he's going to go here, which pins this pawn and allows him to take. But then I will just play this g6 move that I've been playing. My opponent's also got 30 seconds, so yeah, he's feeling the pressure a little bit. I think I'm going to do this. I plan to do this for a while just to restructure here. And now I really want to accomplish the move c4. So how do we do that? Maybe queen c6, lining up here, and then queen d5, centralizing. If rook comes down to a7, which he can now do, there is rook to a8, and I immediately trade his rook. It has nowhere to go. This is guarded. Now we've simplified the rooks. I'm no longer under any pressure. I can put my queen directly into the center of the board, defending my pawn. Well, that doesn't quite work. I think maybe he slipped, and now I take. But even if the bishop had gone to f2, this would have been, you know, this would have been a game. We'll analyze that very briefly, but now with the 3 connected passed pawns all going down the board, he resigns. And I'm going to pull up the game here and analyze it at the end, just like very briefly, because I said basically everything there was to say. The way you would defend and win a position like this is, again, you cannot play the move c4 here, but d3, and it's never too late for a pawn break. Never too late. I really want to take this g5. Even in the endgame, you say, Levy, this is pushing a pawn over your king. No, it's not. It is not. It's not so scary, because which one of these 3 pieces is ever going to get to my king? Nobody. Nobody. How's the queen going to get to my king? Like this? First of all, if the queen goes here and then here, I will take it there and I will take it there. So, good luck. If the queen goes to b2 and here, okay, I'll take it when it arrives. Thank you very much. It's not going to happen. Queen's not going to kangaroo over the pawn. Zuh. And even if it does, even if the queen gets here, so you need at least another piece, and I can just kick you out with bishop to f8. But, okay, we're also talking about a spot where the queen jumps over 2 pawns, so that is how you should approach pawn play in chess, ladies and gentlemen. Couple of things to remember. Make sure you understand how the pawn breaks work in the openings that you play. For the beginners, that might sound crazy, but y'all don't need to worry about pawn breaks on all levels of the game. If you're more intermediate or advanced, do take a look at some Wikipedia articles, do take a look at my video on pawn structures to understand pawn weaknesses, pawn dynamics, pawn breaks in a little bit of a further detail. But most importantly, you have to understand how the positions you play from an early stage will transition into a comfortable middle game. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know in the comments below if there are any concepts that I haven't covered in my videos yet, and I will be sure to check them out. Welcome to the channel, by the way, if you're new. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.